Hey everyone. So in this video, I want to continue our discussion of the demand curve. And in particular, I want to focus on the non-price determinants of demand. These are all the things that affect the demand for a good or service that aren't the price of the good or service itself. But before I get to that, I just want to review our discussion of the demand curve in general. So we're talking about the demand curve. Okay? And this tells us shows us some relationship between the quantity of a good or service demanded and the price of that good or service. So just to start, we thought of Q, the quantity demanded of a good or service, as being some function of the price. Function of price. Okay. And to make things easy, we assumed a specific form of this function, and we just assume that there's this linear relationship between Q and P, between Q, the quantity, and P, the price. So this simple linear relationship, Q equals this slope coefficient times P, the price, or the slope, if you recall, is the change in Q over the change in P. But there's also all the other things that affect the quantity of a good or service demanded. So I'm just going to put those all over here and say this is everything else other than price that goes into this function. Okay? So to start, we're assuming that this everything else is all held constant. So this whole thing is just one number. So held constant. And you can think of this as the intercept term in this linear equation. Right? So if something were to change with this number, this intercept term, then we'd have a shift of this line, okay? Or the line that's represented by this equation. So if you recall how we started looking at this graphically, so we had this two-dimensional space with Q, which happens to be the dependent variable in this case, but by convention we put it on the horizontal axis, and P, the price of a good or service. Okay, so the demand curve, we said, is downward sloping. Right, there's an inverse relationship between the price of a good or service and the quantity demanded. So the question is, well, what happens when something else changes that affects the quantity of the good or service that's demanded? Right? We said if price changes, we can just look at this function to see how the quantity demanded changes. Right? We know that if price goes up, then the quantity demanded of good or service goes down. But what if something else changes? Right? So if there's a change in something else, we're going to have a shift of the demand curve. So we might have a case where there's what we call an increase in demand. The demand curve shifts to the left, and I'll say this is D1. Or we could have a decrease in demand. I'll just say this is D2. Okay. So the question is, well, what causes a shift in the demand curve? Okay. And these are going to be all of the non-price determinants of a demand. Okay. So all the other things that go into that should be in this function that right now we're assuming are held constant. So the non-price determinants of demand. Okay. So that's going to be the focus of the next video. So I hope to see you then.